TikTok is incentivizing me to make some non-political educational videos. It's a little tricky because my training was mostly in political science. Okay, but one of the political science topics I can't talk about without being political is the mechanisms of different electoral systems, which happened to be my dissertation topic. Also, New York City just had this interesting primary election a few weeks ago using something called the ranked choice system, right? But their general election in November will be using the more common first past the post system. So I want to talk a little about the technical differences between these two systems. Very important. The first past the post system is simple. You check one name, that's it. Whoever gets the most votes wins. But you can probably see that it has some obvious problems. Firstly, if the number of candidates is large, one of them may win the election with a very small share of votes. So New York will have 4 mayoral candidates as far as I know, so that can be a possibility. Since this is a non-political video, I'm not supposed to evaluate specific parties or candidates, but I still need to give you an example. So in Taiwan's 2000 election, the winner of the presidency only got 39% of the votes. The other two candidates actually had more similar policy positions and had 60% of the votes in total, but they ended up losing. Papua New Guinea, an island country next to Australia, is another more extreme example of that. So they started their democracy with a ranked choice system to elect their members of parliament. And then in the 70s, they switched to the first past the post system to make things simple, to make it easier to vote. But it totally messed up. It's a country with hundreds of islands and hundreds of different languages and tribes, which means they have a lot of parties. So when they used first past the post, the winning candidate of each district always had a really small share of votes. Some winners had as few as 12% of the votes. That certainly made a lot of people feel unrepresented. And sometimes ethnic violence broke out because the tribes want to decrease each other's turnout. So in early 2000s, they ended up switching back to the ranked choice system. Political scientists love this kind of natural experiment because they can observe what happened before and after. Not many countries had that. So that was the first problem of the first past the post. The winner may have a very small share of votes. Some popular policy may end up losing because their votes are split. But that's not the only problem. In the long run, when voters and candidates try to avoid the split vote problem, they may have to forgo small parties even if they like them. You probably heard of the term strategic voting, right? So you give up your first preference to avoid wasting your votes. Not only voters engage in strategic voting, politicians also strategically choose big parties over small parties. So after a while, it becomes very hard for new parties to survive. That feels kind of depressing, right? So how does the ranked choice system work? Well, firstly, the ranked choice system has two other names: the instant runoff system and the alternative vote system. If you see these other names somewhere else, they mean the same thing. So when you vote in such a system, you assign a number to each candidate to indicate your preference. 1 for the best candidate, 2 for the second best. But what if you're too lazy to study all the candidates? Well, in New York primaries, you are allowed to just check one candidate. But of course, the more you rank, the more likely your vote will matter. It's a little different in Australia. They also use the ranked choice system, but their voters have to rank all the candidates. And by the way, they also have mandatory voting. So I guess Australian voters just have to do a lot of homework before elections, which is a good thing in my view, but I can't speak for them. So anyway, let's talk about how to count votes in ranked choice system. So in the first round, the election workers or the election computers, whoever is in charge, will only count your first preferences. Say if you put 1 after candidate B, then your votes will go to candidate B. So after counting the first preferences, if one of the candidates has a majority of the votes, then the election is over. But what if no one gets more than 50%? Then what? Then the candidate that gets the least amount of first preference votes is eliminated. And his or her votes will be reassigned to these other candidates based on their second preferences. Now you count them again, right? If one of the candidates gets more than 50%, the counting is over. If not, another candidate is eliminated and their votes gets reassigned. As you can see, eventually one person will get 50% of the votes when all but two candidates are eliminated, which means the winner will always have a majority of the ballots in their pile. So the best thing about this system is that the winner will represent more than half of the voters, including some people who aren't crazy about them but consider them as a safe choice. So in the end, at least a majority of voters are happy. In the long run, it also partly solves the rigidity problem. Voters don't have to forgo small parties because even if their favorite parties get eliminated, their second and third choice will still matter. They can feel free to vote with their hearts. France has a system kind of similar to the ranked choice system, even though it looks very different. It's called a two-round system. So there's no ranking. Each voter just checks one of the candidates. If someone wins a majority, they're elected. But if there's no majority winner, what do? Voters will have to come back and vote again. But this time, the minor candidates from the first round will be excluded from the ballots. So if your first preference gets eliminated in the first round, you'll still have another chance to vote for the lesser of the two evils. So France have slightly different rules for their presidential and parliamentary elections, but I don't want to bore you with the detail. All you need to know is that they use two-round systems for both kinds of elections. You can probably tell that even though the format is very different from the ranked choice system, the math is similar. Voters first express their sincere preferences, and after their candidates get eliminated, they have a chance to switch to a more hopeful candidate. So what happens is that the winning candidates tend to be centrist figures with broad appeal because they not only need passionate supporters in the first round, they also need those who are okay with them in the second round. So having a passionate cottage following can make you do well in the first round, but it may not be enough to give you a majority in the second round. The National Front leader Marine Le Pen and her late dad both had that problem. This is 2017, so Le Pen did pretty well in the first round, but got literally crushed in the second round. As you can see, a lot of small party voters abstained in the second round, which was pretty normal, but most of them still showed up and switched their votes to one of the top candidates. Because why not? And you can also see that the French party system is much less rigid than the US one. Parties and coalitions come and go. So this is their party system in the last election versus their party system 18 years ago. You can hardly recognize they're the same country, right? So people aren't afraid of trying new parties in the first round because they know they have the second round anyway. Is it a good thing policy-wise? I'm not sure. It's very hard to compare two countries' policy performance because what parameters do you use? But if you want more choices, more changes, this seems to be a good outcome. So yeah, a country's choice of electoral systems matters a lot. The US system is simply too old and too rigid, almost kind of hopeless. About 80 to 90% of the US congressional seats are considered safe seats because you know which party will win. That would be unimaginable in a ranked choice or two-round system. Not only there are more competitors, but also when you have 3 or 4 parties, it's very hard to gerrymander. You know what gerrymandering means, right? So if you want to gerrymander a district, you have to accurately predict the geographic distribution of your supporters, especially based on race. But if there are 4 or 5 parties that cut across racial lines, how do you draw the map? That's why gerrymandering is almost exclusively an American phenomenon. Other countries simply have too many parties. Well, of course, some countries only have 1 party, or in that case, they don't even need to gerrymander. Okay, that was probably the shortest introduction you can find on this topic. 3 electoral systems in 1 video. Impressive, right? I also want to let you know that in my view, none of these systems is as good as the proportional representation system, which I will explain some other time. I do provide personal tutoring services, by the way. Hit me up if you are interested.